What is up, y'all? It's your boy Aniki coming at you with a new review from My Hero Academia Chapter 335, Zygotes Kohei Horekoshi. Alright, you already know, we go on page by page with the breakdown. Let's go. So, immediately we kick things off with Deku getting the report from All Might and Class A being there, understanding that it is true that the jet fighters were able to record data from the fight to let people know that Shigaraki's body took substantial damage last fight, and that New Order did in fact, cause some harm. So they're aware of this, explaining that the pilots came in with that information, with them all agreeing that they need to strike now, as suggested by like Momo and Jiro's combined dialogue. We get an understanding that heroes have gone down to less than 50% of what they had going into the war, and that apparently Fat Gum is still alive. So that's something that I don't think was talked about a lot, but there is an upside for a lot of people. We see that again, Gorka did require a new scar. Wash has clearly been out there just consistently grinding with the amount of damage on the costume, etc., etc. Now, understanding that All For One did truly experience a setback is of value to the story, because it means that he actually is doing certain things due to his plans not working out. So the assessment of the threat level is that, like, we kind of get this idea that Shigaraki, in all his danger, is still considered the #1 most dangerous villain. I think part of this comes down to the fact that ultimately, with decay and the way he is now, anytime that Shigaraki deems it so, he can simply walk into a city, tap the ground, and decay about half of it, even without the enhancements from One for All or All for One. So even before factoring in that All For One and him are fusing souls and bodies and all this other stuff, and the access to the All For One quirk, just as a threat, Shigaraki was already dangerous, and then you get to compound it with that. Meanwhile, we talk about All For One, who is a character that is objectively post-prime, but still a powerhouse nonetheless. And then we bring up Dabi, who is somebody who, is fights back, but also, and then we see Toga, and then we talk about the near high ends. And you could argue that the near high ends might be more dangerous than Toga or something like that, but ultimately it's the intellectual aspects of the combat involving Toga that keep her. So they talk about the members of the Paranormal Liberation Front, but they don't address Spinner, which I think is intentional, because what's happening here is now that Heteromorphs get to address this from an angle of the heroes don't even acknowledge us when we're in powerful positions as threats. It's like they're just kind of off the radar entirely, which is kind of crazy to think about, especially with Spinner having been there through all of these different encounters and having actually killed some people. But it is what it is, and I think that in of itself is going to be another blind spot of the heroes going forward, because Spinner is the most loyal follower to Shigaraki, which means he is willing to do the most dangerous acts for him. At the end of the day, that's something to remember, is that the most devoted are the most zealous. Now, we also have to address all the escaped convicts, of course, but what I'm seeing here is that the villains have full forces. They're basically in control of society. The board is set so that the heroes are at a disadvantage, and it's extremely important to understand this. Every raid or attempt that any hero side faction can attempt that ends in lost lives or people being injured or crippled or more people quitting just makes things worse. And we are directly heading into them attempting a raid or an attack on All For One's base in hopes of stopping Shigaraki. Basically, PLW versus Heroes 2, Electric Boogaloo, except it's going to be worse. Now, when they start talking about the training aspect, of course, this is that there's a surprising amount of levity in these interactions with Bakugo here, which is mostly what I consider kind of to be like a red flag. Not necessarily on like the writing of the story, but moreover on the direction of how bad this is about to get, because this doesn't feel like they're properly analyzing the situation, or they're a little too confident. And we've seen what confidence can do and where it can lead to them going wrong with the PLW versus Heroes arc, and in general, just like we talked about with Kamino, not expecting All For One to actually be there, Or when Endeavor fought the high end on his first day, and he decided that he would be able to fight Hood to capture instead of fighting to like straight up take down a monster, and then that came and really bite him in the ass because by the time he realized he needed to fight for the like lethal blow, he had already taken substantial damage and started to overheat. So things to factor in here. Now, they kind of talk about how All Might's been extremely distant, not interactive with them, and there's a certain level of, to me, like snippiness that comes with them trying to prove themselves to All Might, because I think this is kind of highlighting that a lot of the class feels disrespected and undervalued by All Might, like running off with Deku and not communicating with them, and them having to go do this and bring Deku back themselves, even though All Might himself, when it was time for protecting Deku and bringing him back, couldn't do it himself. So I think that's where a bit of this pushback is coming from. And then obviously we get the Deku versus Class 1A, which I think we will actually get that chapter, especially because Invisible Girl will likely, if depending on what's going on here, which we'll talk about once we get to the final page of the chapter, but if Invisible Girl is actually a traitor, or if there is the traitor is a go in this plot line, then they'll want to give as fresh of a report as possible to All For One on what Deku's powers are and what he has access to, as information is extremely key. And while he may have been able to observe the Nagant fight, he has no way of knowing what Deku was doing to do all of these things. So it will be best for him to make sure he knows for certain that this is what Deku's doing. This also means, though, that when All For One said that, in a couple days, probably a rainy day, I just want to point out that because of the fact that all of Class A got letters, you can argue that's where that information really came from. Now, but when we get them talking about their sparring, both Bakugo and Shoto acknowledge that they want to be in competition with One For All, because Bakugo says, I want to see what kind of blast my cluster shots have in comparison to One For All. And Shoto says, that's right. Like, he's like, yeah, ultimately I'm trying to be strong enough to actually be a threat in these fights. So I have seen some theories about Bakugo being the one to fight Old Man All For One, and Deku fighting Shigaraki, and maybe that's what's actually being set up here with Dabi and Shoto on the horizon too. Though that would be if we're actually going to go with the doom and gloom theory of the story is coming to an end. But we could also just look at these as final matchups, or things that will be matchups this arc, and how that actually plays out is an entirely different situation. Kirishima, of course, stepping up to get blasted again, showing that the team is still working together. This is like the idea of this is to build up a bit of like hype about the class's unity and the way they work together. And I'd also just like to point out that Horikoshi makes a point to emphasize the big seven of the class, or like some of the main seven that have been followed on missions, with it being Su, Uraraka, Ida, Deku, Shoto, Kirishima, and Bakugo, especially when All Might's talking about the Zygotes having hatched. Tokoyami spoke in this chapter, but he spoke alongside Mina, which, if you remember, was the pairing from, I believe it was Heroes Rising, that fought against Slice. So I think that's another small movie nod that Horikoshi's throwing into the manga here. But this group here is like the main seven, and I'm pretty sure Kirishima, Shoto, and Ida, along with Su, were the team that fought Chimera. So just more emphasis on like squads that already existed, which means we could be looking at Bakugo, Deku, and Uraraka moving as a team at some point and interacting with somebody, which, if you remember, for Heroes Team Up, when that manga released, that was one of the first pairings. So interesting thing to see here. Now, All Might is telling All For One that he messed up and that he fumbled and he made a foolish move. And every time All Might says some stuff like that, it leads into a plot where the villains get a hold of some shit they really, we don't need them to get a hold of. Because I would like to remind people that after the meeting between All Might and All For One, I believe we got the provisional license exam, and followed by the overhaul arc, which was when Toga got a hold of information about all the schools because she had kidnapped a student and acquired some of Uraraka's blood, and that was when they got a hold of the quirky racing bullets. So something to think about is when All Might gets cocky these days, it seems to lead to some pretty dangerous content. And and not in the favor of the heroes ultimately. Now, we see that the body is still freaking out after all the quirk factors having to rebel against New Order. Now, this very much was like an infectious disease or an autoimmune disease, like such as rheumatoid arthritis or I believe lupus, some of these other ones that just kind of make your body start attacking itself. So if you remember from like the quirks are disease video, we talked about how different bacteriophages within your body could be what actually allow for people to propagate and utilize their quirks, because it's been spread and it's just kind of like everybody has like certain loads of cells and stuff that lead to the quirks being usable. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I will link you my History Academia too. But with that factored in, you could argue that what effectively happened is as the New Order cells came into Melvin or Shigaraki for one, or all for Shiggy's body, however you want to say it, as that came in and started going throughout, it created an immune system flare up, and basically all the cells comprising of the different quirks started attacking New Order. But in the process of New Order being such a powerful quirk in of itself, it was able to kind of tear apart and destroy, causing, you know, basically like typical flare ups like the pins and needles and the pains and all that other stuff that you would get from an arthritis patient. So all these cell factors and these, you know, structures are trying to repair themselves, reach like normal levels. And so this is just like the pain of healing and like proper restoration. Like all his quirk factors were being attacked. So everything, even the regeneration quirk, might have taken some damage, which is leading to it taking some time to properly heal, slowing down his healing process, keeping him in pain, which seems to be the case. So we got basically an entire, you know, immune disease flare up just throughout his body, causing him intense pain. So yeah. Now, when Shigaraki is talking about how he wants to kill every last remnant of what All Might like has left, and that very much sounds like the Shigaraki we know talking. And when you factor that in, I think it's worth noting, especially that he's intending to take a fully active role in this upcoming conflict. And I don't think, even with his reduced quirk numbers, people are fully prepared for the level of threat he is going to present, because when he is not being stopped by Aizawa, we see some of the stuff that he's capable of, and it's only going to be more destructive and more malicious from here. Now, All For One acknowledges that he can tell that their minds are fusing. We get more confirmation that the All For One connection with Vestige for one seems to function very similarly to the All Might and Deku connection, where they don't actually communicate through each other. They just kind of get a vibe or a sense of feelings. As All Might mentioned, when his Vestige started crying, he couldn't tell what was going on, but he could tell that his Vestige was feeling some form of pride and something that led to crying. Now, All For One and Toya end up having a conversation here where I still think it's interesting that All For One only exclusively refers to him as Toya. Maybe that's just like, since that's happened, he's just thrown away the name of Dabi, and he goes by Toya period from now on. We see that he's not dyeing his hair anymore. Now, the things that All For One is saying are implying that he has in common with Toya are likely his overall ability to be a hater and be petty and plan and scheme and go about their way to play the long con, like Dabi did with Dabi's dance and setting all that up for the live stream. But he makes it a point to say that and really this is just kind of him, because he can live longer and because he has gotten to live longer, he gets to plan around for years and years and years, whereas Dabi hasn't really gotten to live that long. He's only 24, 25, and that's not that crazy much of amount of a time. So we get All For One's stance on how they don't need to jump the gun and react, and because he tells it like Dabi straight up, you know, we're delayed, sure. Yue has welcomed Izuku Midoriya back, and I have something that you lack. And he was like, and those are friends to spare. So first of all, when you have friends to spare, that means some of them are expendable, so that already puts Invisible Girl in a position where we could be losing her if she's truly going to be the traitor. And I'm largely going to address this from the angle of her being the traitor, just because I don't feel like arguing with it right now. And because going forward, I'd rather just focus on what could be presented to us here, because what I consider this to be is then what we thought was going to be more going into a raid is likely going to be an arc building around the UA traitor. And this is kind of similar to Dabi's dance for me, where it's about what comes next and how the reveal is about to impact the story. And us being handed the potential information that Invisible Girl is the traitor before the class means that we're going to be seeing her around other people. We're going to be getting to watch her interact with, and we're going to be planning around her having infiltrated the class. Now, from that angle, when we see Deku learn a new move, or we see Bakugo doing some stuff, that means that we have to worry about that data getting back to All For One. If we see them come up with combo moves where they do another thing like they did to catch up to Deku, that information goes back to All For One. And there's different little scenes throughout the series, like when she made it a point to sit next to Bakugo during the Forest Training Camp arc, and that kind of stuff that could have led her having some red flags before, or like how she would have technically been like sleeping naked, so she could have actually been gone when she was at the training camp bed or whatever, so we don't know for sure. And little stuff like that designed to effectively give away that she was like always like there, and or how she vanished, and which again, the Aoyama thing saying it's a secret, it could be that Aoyama has been extorted this entire time, and that's the real meaning behind it's a secret. And Hagakure was just giving props to Shoto and giving props to Ojiro, because her knowing that Ojiro fighting alone wasn't that, I didn't consider it that indicting. I didn't consider it that incriminating, because of the fact that ultimately they would have all been in a group talking about what happened and how they had to deal with it. And Ojiro would have been like, oh man, I was looking for you guys the entire time, and blah, blah, blah. And then it would have been like, oh, well, like, really cool, you were fighting alone. So it was kind of weird, a little touch and go there. So the main thing that I thought about, though, is that when you look at a lot of the characters within the class, they have some form of interaction either with Deku, or even in the case of like Kaminari, for example, multiple interactions with Bakugo that make it really hard to really see either of them wanting to be the actual traitor, like Kaminari being friends with Bakugo, getting the provisional license together with them. Kirishima's been friends with both of them, so that was kind of a good way to rule them out. We got to have character focus of Jiro when she was working on, Culture Festival. We've been getting sprinkles of Momo throughout the story. We've been getting different, like Sero has consistently been painted as like an everyman, and he's been placed into the background throughout the story, and has been a functional like background side support character the entire story. Let's see, Asu has constantly been worried about the safety of, and even if people don't necessarily like that scene, the scene where she's upset during the room contest, at least that helps certify that she wasn't the traitor. And when you look through a lot of the students, we have some form of justification for why they could not be the traitor, with Aoyama wanting to be friends with Deku, and ultimately, him being like, I can't, stop this thing. And then like we saw him looking sad, which makes it feel like the art exhibit was more like Horikoshi telling us that Aoyama wasn't the traitor. He was afraid of the circumstances and was a victim under the threat of the all-seeing eye, or with the all-seeing eye being All For One in this case. Now, Sato, we would have gotten characterization on during Culture Festival and during the showing of the rooms that, he was, the baker, he helped him out with Eri. So we got some ideas like a small legitimate bond between Sato and Deku bonding with Mina a little during Culture Festival with the dance teams. The more characters I list off in Class 1A, and I don't even have a list in front of me, I'm just kind of like cycling through them in my head. You had Mineta, who bonded with him during the USJ. And then we've seen Mineta think of Midoriya as inspiration throughout the story, like during Final Exam arc. All these characters, Ida, you have Hosu City. I don't need to explain Shoto. I don't need to explain Bakugo's bond with Deku. Uraraka, nope, don't need to explain that. All these characters. And like with Momo, you could be like, oh, well, she's not that close to Deku, which I would agree with, but she was in the band with Bakugo. She's close to Jiro. She's close to, I think Kaminari too, because he's in the study group. Basically, a lot of students study with Momo, and she helps a lot of them out. So different characters that were painted as the pillars of the class. And then you think back through all these arcs that I mentioned, and you don't have a lot of Invisible Girl directly being friends with people. And it's stated that, and if you think back, Invisible Girl was the one who suggested they go to the mall. So it's kind of obvious that Invisible Girl made it a point to be friends with people, but in a very tertiary sense. And then furthermore, I would like to say that Invisible Girl, you could argue that, like, a lot of people were like, oh, Kaminari's room is the traitor because his room just looks like he threw a bunch of stuff together trying to look like a normal boy. But now you see that was kind of more, you could argue that was really the hint with Invisible Girl, whose bedroom was just a bunch of super girly things to make her look like the average girl. So interesting how what could have been used in against Invisible Girl was instead used against Kaminari, especially since Kaminari was the one who actually got like sad and was like, I think this stuff's cool, like, what do you guys mean? So just something to think about. I'm trying to think if I missed, you got characters like Shoji and Tokoyami. Tokoyami and Shoji bonded with Deku during Forest Training Camp arc when they were trying to rescue Bakugo, plus Tokoyami worked with Deku during the sports festival. I don't know why I blanked on that for a second. So yeah, we got, and Ojiro bonded with Deku during Sports Festival 2 when he made it a point to ask him to take out Shinso for using his mind control on him. So legitimately, you can run through every character in Class 1A and find a moment of them bonding with Deku. Oh, except for Koda, because Koda's a bitch. Which, actually, let me think about this, because I don't remember Koda having any special moments with anybody besides Jiro, but that has more to do with his shyness and how he needed to rise up for her. So I shouldn't be too harsh on him. But ultimately, like, and if you remember, even Koda, when he tried to yell to Midoriya, he had one of the weakest reasons, saying that, the principal said he could come back to school. So that's kind of been acknowledged within the plot that, like, Koda is one of the few other characters who has nothing going for him, but he's just straight up scared of talking over half the time. So that's a large part of what led to that. So his very personality was against the idea. So, like, you could have made him a traitor, but I don't think anybody would have taken that seriously because he was getting folded too often. Now, moving forward though, obviously, like, for those of you who have been following the channel for a while, I thought Principal Nezu was going to be the traitor. And I'm even going to say that I don't know that everything that's happened in the story can be justified with Invisible Girl having been the traitor throughout the entire story. So a multi-traitor reveal would not shock me. But I do think that we need to read this upcoming arc from the perspective of we need to see what they are setting up for an Invisible Girl to inevitably cause to fail. Nothing can cause a time skip more in My Hero Academia, because I think what a lot of people consider to feel like rushing towards the end, I think it's rushing towards the end of the Class 1A versus the League of Villains and all this other stuff, saga or time period of the story. I think what feels like him rushing towards the end might just be him setting up the next phase of the actual story. At this point, I can't see properly wrapping all of these plot points up. So, and I don't really see Horikoshi as the kind of dude that's just going to throw his story away either. He's accidentally extended too many arcs for me to believe that that's the direction that he would go randomly. So I kind of expect this to turn into us exploring who Invisible Girl is, what her ideology is, why she's considered friends to All For One, which means there's a good chance she's not actually a teenager. And then what she's expected to get out of this, why, and then furthermore, like, how she actually feels about some of these characters and her time there. I've seen something that suggested that Toru Hagakure's name was always like Hidden Leaf, which implied that she was always like a ninja or a spy. She didn't come there to be a hero. So you got all these little interesting things like that. So I'm hoping we get some clear explanations. I do have an explanation for why I thought Nezu made a great candidate for traitor. So I'll link that too, just because it was an interesting topic. But yeah, hope you all have a wonderful day. See you all for the Church of MHA, and I hope if you enjoyed One Piece, make sure you check out the One Piece reviews that I do too. That's all I really got to say. I'm Monarchy, and I am out.